I'm Rabbi Julia Andelman, Director of Community Engagement at JTS, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's session of our summer series of Wandering People, Jewish Journeys, Real and Imagined. Special welcome to any first-time people joining us for the first time today. And we're so pleased to have Rabbi Eliezer Diamond teaching us today. His session is entitled Preparing for the Final Journey, the Taharah Ritual and its Significance. So you can see we approach this, this theme of journeys in the broadest way possible. And we're really looking forward to this session in which Rabbi Diamond is going to elucidate for us what this ritual means in terms of journeying to the next world, how we conceive of that idea. I want to thank so much Ruthie and Dr. Ronald Golden, who have sponsored today's session at the Tzaddik level in honor of their daughter, Dr. Meredith Katz, who is Clinical Assistant Professor of Jewish Education right here at JTS at the William Davidson Graduate School of Education. Thank you so much to the Goldens for your generosity in sponsoring the session today. And anyone else, if you're feeling inspired by these wonderful learning opportunities with JTS faculty, we want to invite you to consider partnering with us by also sponsoring a session. We have two levels, Chacham for $540 and Tzaddik for $1,000, and you can learn more by emailing learninglives@jtsa.edu. Thank you so much once again to the Goldens. For Q&A today, just to review, you can use the chat feature to submit questions to me, and Rabbi Diamond will pause periodically for Q&A, and I'll select from the questions that you send to me. And if you have questions of a technical or logistical nature, you can send those via the chat to Tani Schwartz-Herman or Lynn Feynman. You should have received the sources for today's session in the email that you got earlier today with the Zoom link. I will also post them. And we'll screen share them. And on that note, it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Diamond, who is Rabbi Judah Nadich Associate Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS. He teaches courses in rabbinic literature and Talmud studies. He's written on prayer, asceticism, and issues of environmental law and ethics. He's taught in a variety of settings, Stern College, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, 92nd Street Y, Ramah camps, and obviously JTS and many synagogues around the country through JTS and on his own. And I know a lot of you have already learned with him through the many times that he's brought his wisdom and insight to this Monday series that we began over a year ago. So thank you, Rabbi Diamond, for teaching us, and I turn it over to you.
Okay, let me try that again. Thank you, Rabbi Andelman, and shalom. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be with you. I'll start on a personal note, which I often do. I'm getting life coaching, and my life coach introduced me to an important distinction between change and transition. Okay, so change is changing your seat in the subway from the one you're in to the next one over, and transition is stopping to take the subway and using Lyft. In other words, one is, it's really more of the same, and the other is something totally different is happening. And I mention this because what we're going to talk about today is a trip that is truly transformative. It is the ultimate transition. And it is important in its own right, and it's also a reminder to us that when we travel, in whatever form we do, it's something to think about. Is this just a change? I was in San Francisco and now I'm in LA, or is there a transition, a transformation taking place? And of course, we play a role, central role, in whether or not that happens. So let's back up now and go back to the beginning. What separates the dead from the living? On the most obvious level, it's actually, you know what, even before I do that, I realize I'm not sure that everyone can tell from the title exactly what we're doing today. So let me spell that out so that there's no mystery. So Tahara is a ritual by which the deceased is prepared for burial. It's a Jewish ritual by which the deceased is prepared for burial, and the word Tahara means purification. So that's the ritual that we're going to be talking about, and outlining the ritual itself, but also thinking about this ritual as a journey and framing a journey, the journey from life to what happens after life. So with that, what separates the dead from the living? Obviously, the loss of biological functions that allow us to live. Sometimes that's blurred. We have all kinds of ethical issues that arise in defining whether we consider a person to be dead or not. This is an issue in Jewish law. It's an issue in ethics. But there's an understanding that at some point, a person is no longer among the living, and major reason that that is so is that biological functions have ceased. Jewish law is very careful about this, about not hastening death in any way, because the fundamental view of the Torah is that our own lives are not ours. And this is reflected so many ways in Jewish life. Those of you who say Modeh Ani in the morning, say Modeh Ani Lufanecha Melech Chai V'Kayam, Shechazarta Bi Nishmati Bechemla. Thank you, God. I praise you, but really I also acknowledge you. I'm giving a receipt. Received. One soul. You give me a soul today. So when I wake up, the I that wakes up is an I that is actually belonging to the Creator, and that has been given me on loan. That life force that I have is on loan. So since my life force is on loan, I have to be very careful in terms of how I handle it, and I cannot do anything to end life without justification. So life is the loss of biological function. When I pass away, according to the Torah, in the Torah's image of Sheol, my existence becomes shadowy. The Torah describes this place called Sheol, where spirits exist, but they're not substantial in the same way that we are as human beings. For the rabbis, the greatest tragedy of death, perhaps, is that we can no longer perform mitzvot. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, Perek Dalet, Mishnah Yudzayin 4:17, better 1 hour of repentance and good actions in this world than the whole life of the world to come. Yafa sha'a achat b'tshuva masim tovim ba'olam hazeh mikol chayei olam haba. And there's a very poignant halacha, which is that I'm not allowed to walk within a certain distance of a grave wearing my tefillin and tzitzit. Why not? Because I'm seen as mocking the dead. I'm able to perform mitzvot, and you're not. So we are worried about hurting the feelings of the deceased, as it were. If you want to look that up, that's in Brachot, in the Babylonian Talmud, Brachot 18a. So this is some of what we lose. What else do we lose when we die? We become vulnerable, and there is the possibility of indignity. Okay? A corpse, a body, has no way of defending itself. what will happen to that body? That is a concern of halakha, that is a concern of human beings. And part of what the Tahara process about is protecting that vulnerable body from possible indignities. What do I gain when I die? What happens for me? I gain minucha. I gain rest. All the pain, the striving, the disappointment, I leave that behind me. I'm also under God's presence. This is something that we talk about in the Kel Malay, the prayer that we recite to commemorate the dead. That the dead are tachat, or according to other versions, me'al, under or on kanfei hashchina, the wings of the divine presence. And third, I'm in olam emet. I'm in the world of truth. I'm in a place where there's no more deception. I don't know how many people have ever read Bashevis Singer's, Isaac Bashevis Singer's Gimple the Fool. But it's a story about a man who's constantly fooled by other people. He's a fool and he's fooled by other people constantly. And the very end of the story, I'm just going to read this. It's one of my favorite paragraphs in all of literature. He's coming close to his death and he says, no doubt the world, this world, is entirely an imaginary world, but it is only once removed from the true world, Olam HaEmet. At the door of the hovel where I lie, there stands the plank on which the dead are taken away. The grave digger Jew has his spade ready. The grave waits, and the worms are hungry. The shrouds are prepared. I carry them in my beggar's sack. Another schnorrer is waiting to inherit my bed of straw. When the time comes, I will go joyfully. Whatever may be there, it will be real, without complication, without ridicule, without deception. God be praised. There, even Gimple cannot be fooled. That is the Olam HaEmet. There are no kunsten in the world to come. It is what it is, which is, of course, simultaneously comforting and terrifying. Both. So we lose something when we die, and we gain something when we die. We leave behind a vital world. We leave behind the world of action. We go to a world where our races run. We can't do mitzvot anymore. We can't change things. We can't shape things. But on the other hand, we are ushered into the presence of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. And the Tahara ritual that we're going to talk about has two functions, at least two functions. One is it deals with the person who has passed away in this liminal period, that is, in this period between death and what follows death. But if we use the image of the journey, when I die, my soul has left my body and it's on the way to the world to come, but it needs to be ushered on that journey. And equally important, and this is so important, in Jewish tradition, my body, I continue to be my body, even in my death. My body does not fall away from me. My soul and my body both somehow make that journey into the world to come. And so the Tahara process respects that. It respects the body as well as the soul. And it treats that body with great dignity. It treats the person as a whole with great dignity. and it prepares that person, the deceased, for the journey through a transformational process. It helps me, if I'm the deceased, it helps me slough off my this worldly identity and take on a new one. That's what Tahara is about. Okay. All right. I think it's a little. So yeah, let's see. If there's a question, I'll take it now. And if not, we'll get into it.
I haven't gotten any questions yet. I'm certainly curious what you mean about the body making the journey as well. But I imagine you're going to be telling us a little about that.
Yep. We'll see that. So we can divide the Tahara ritual into 5 parts. One is Shmirah, guarding the body at all times. So, of course, part of what that has to do with is stepping up for the powerless, the vulnerable, right? The body cannot defend itself. And so I'm there to protect the body, right? In some cultures, animals could get at the body. There are various things that can happen. So on a practical level, Shmirah is guarding the body from any kind of harm or bizayon. I can't, denigration is a better word, just can't think of it. Getting like my Israeli son, I can't say words in English. And guarding the body is a sign of honor. Who gets guardians? People deserving of honor. So the Shmirah also is a way of showing honor for the person who passed away. Rechitza, we wash the body to remove dirt and foreign matter. Tahara, we ritually immerse the body, which, if you know anything about biblical Israel, actually is a very, very strange idea. What is the archetypical and the primary form of tum'ah, of ritual impurity? It's the dead. It's a corpse. And yet, in this ritual, which developed sometime in the medieval period, we have it delineated most extensively in a book called Ma'avar Yabok, Crossing the Yabok River, by Rav Aaron Brechia, who was an Italian, the 17th century Italian scholar. And in that book, we have the earliest, most extensive description of the ceremony. So here we have the idea that a corpse is being taken and purified, ritually purified, which in biblical and rabbinic law is a contradiction in terms. It can't be done. But yet in this ritual, we are ritually purifying the dead. And then we have halbasha, clothing the dead, putting on their dark garments, and hashkava, placing the dead in the coffin, laying them out, as we say, and then the coffin is sealed and the physical journey begins. So if you want to think about it this way, there is a conceptual journey and a physical journey. In the Tahara room, there is a conceptual transformation. As a person, I move from simply being someone lacking life, lacking what I had in life, to becoming someone else. And we'll talk about what that someone else or who that someone else is. And then when I become that someone else through the Tahara process, I'm ushered out of the Tahara room and I'm taken to my final resting place in the cemetery. Okay. Any questions now? Because if not, we're going to start screen sharing.
We do have questions now.
Okay.
One question is, do we know anything about how or why this ritual developed?
Don't know a lot, and I'm going to bracket that, because if I get into that rabbit hole, you'll never hear everything else that I want to share with you. So it's a good question. I'm not going to talk about it now. There has, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been a comprehensive study done on this subject. If you, whoever's interested, if you email me at eldiamond@jtsa.edu, I can send you some, what's it called again? Send you some references, articles you can read.
Okay, great, thank you. And this is sort of a whole other issue, but it might be on the minds of some people, depending on their personal experience, which is the reality, perhaps becoming more common, of cremation.
Right. So that's one of the reasons that this discussion is an important discussion, because Judaism, or Torah, as I prefer, Judaism is actually not a Jewish word. Torah, the way of Torah, is an embodied way of life. Right? We live it in our spirit, but we're always living it through body. There are always things to do. And part of what Tahara is about is insisting that even in death, we are still, part of who we are our bodies, which is why cremation is really antithetical to this way of thinking about what it means to be a person, what it means to be a human being. Okay, this is one of the reasons that some Jews will often have, some Jews will not just say, oh, you shouldn't cremate. They'll have a very visceral reaction to it, because there is a sense that's expressed in the Tahara ritual that just because we died doesn't mean that this body is no longer us. This is still us. This is still an us. This is still who we are, and we should be treated as such. Let's get into the ritual, and we'll see that more clearly. Okay. So let's look how the ritual begins. The Chevra Kadisha, right, is a group of people who have volunteered to prepare the mate, the deceased, for burial, begin by asking forgiveness of the deceased. And they say, so-and-so, daughter, son of so-and-so and so-and-so, we ask your forgiveness for any distress we may cause you during this Tahara. We will do everything possible to ensure that you are treated with respect and that all the elements of Tahara are properly completed. Everything we are about to do is for the sake of your honor. So, of course, this is a reminder to us, if we're members of the Chevra Kadisha, but also saying to this person, right? This is affirming the personhood of the deceased. Okay, the person is dead, but this person is still present, and present as a person. We're speaking to the body because we still see the person as being present in that body and being that body. And we say, you are powerless now. Okay. And we are going to be handling your body, manipulating your body. And that itself is potentially degrading. And we're aware of that. And we're going to do our best to treat you with respect and awareness. I don't know if people, Shelley and I last night just watched The Untouchables. It's good, it's bad. Anyway, it's about a man who is caring for someone who is paralyzed from the neck down. And in part, it's a meditation on this. What is it like when someone who has power is dealing with someone who has no power? And one of the things that the people with power have to know is that they have the potential to cause humiliation. And they have to do their best not to do so. And then the next prayer, the Chamol prayer, is a prayer for the deceased. Master of the universe, have compassion for so-and-so and so-and-so, who is the daughter of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and so on. In other words, this person has good yichus. They have a good pedigree. They come from good folk. So treat them well. And notice it says at a certain point in this prayer, and also let it be acceptable before you, our eternal God and God of our ancestors, to bring a circle of angels of mercy before the Meitah. This is for a woman who has passed away, who is your servant woman, daughter of your servant woman. Think about how powerful that is. The Chevra Kadisha is saying, we're just human beings, and we're doing our best to protect this person and to be here. But we're just human beings. So God, we ask you to bring angels. We ask you to bring the forces of heaven to guard over this person and to prepare this person, to usher this person to the next step. Okay, I'm moving down. I think I have to move this. The body is now uncovered and examined, getting ready for Rechitza. And notice the verse that's used from Zechariah chapter 3, verse 4. This is from the prophet Zechariah, and you may recognize this. It's read as a haftarah on Chanukah. And the story in Zechariah chapter 3 is that Zechariah sees Joshua, the high priest, wearing clothing, and the angel, and I'll read the verse now, the angel of God raised his voice and spoke to those standing before him, saying, remove the soiled garments from him. Joshua's garments are seen as being soiled, and said to the high priest, behold, I have removed your iniquity from you, and I will clothe you in fine garments. That's Zechariah's vision. So think about what it means to recite this verse as the deceased is being unclothed and being prepared to be washed and immersed and then dressed in the shrouds. These clothes are not, the mate's clothes are not just seen as clothes. They are seen as their identity as a person in the everyday world. And the clothes that we wear as everyday people, by definition, are soiled. We get our hands dirty. We make mistakes. We do things that are wrong. We hurt people. And so what the Chevra Kadisha is saying is, we are now removing that from you. You are shrugging off your identity as a person who has lived among us. And all of your faults, all of your disappointments, everything, you leave behind with the clothing that we remove from you. But notice who this person is who's wearing the soiled garments. It's a Kohen Gadol, it's a high priest. And this anticipates what's going to happen a bit later in the ritual. Let's take a moment to see if there are questions.
Okay, thank you. So not directly on what you just shared, but I think on the larger question of Tahara. So we talked about cremation before, which I just wanted to say is, I think you gave the honest answer in terms of how the tradition views it, and yet it that might be sort of a spiritual challenge for some people on the call, depending on their decisions of loved ones, that kind of thing. But the related questions that have been asked already about organ donation, which I know you have a personal connection to, and like donating one's body to science or to medical research. Can you comment on, do those things detract from what we're trying to do with Tahara? And if not, why not?
Okay, so I think I'm glad you're saying this, because I feel as though we can hear traditional voices in a variety of ways. And one is as a demanding and accusatory voice. This is the way it's done, folks. It's Tahara. There's no cremation. Cremation is a terrible thing, etc., etc., etc. I would be very sad if that's how you're hearing my voice. I am inviting you to hear a voice, a way of thinking about what it means to be a body in death, and what it means to relate to a body in death. And my hope in this session is that we are opening ourselves to hearing this and to learning from it what we can. I'm in no way saying, and if you don't do this, and if you do cremate, then fill in some horrible thing after that part of the sentence. But even if I do cremate a relative, or I want cremation myself, well, hearing this maybe is a moment to think about it. Is that what I want to do? Here's another way of seeing things. But number two, I think what is so important, there are two things that are really, really important about the Tahara process. And I think if we get hung up on the embodied part, we're going to miss it. One is, yes, this idea that we always remain our bodies. But two is that death is not just a change, it's a transition, it's a transformation. So I think it'd be helpful to sort of bracket the cremation, burial question, and not to hear this as an accusing, judgmental voice, and just say, make believe it's a Hindu ritual. Make believe it's not coming from in Judaism, where there's always the potential for the accusatory voice. It's a way of thinking about how we deal with death. With regard to organs and organ donation, indeed, everything that's positive can also have negative results. So this idea of valuing the body has led to a general resistance on the part of many Jews to donate organs. And there are there's an organization actually of rabbis who have battled against this. Because if this value for this valuing of the deceased leads to not giving life to those who need life by not donating organs, then I believe, and this organization says, the priorities are skewed. So yes, we value and we respect the body of the deceased, and yes, if an organ of the deceased can give life to someone else, ein lacha mitzvah gedola mezo. There's no greater mitzvah than that. That's what I would say.
Would you say the same? I've just had the question from a few people now. Would you say the same about donating one's body for medical research?
Not going to answer that question. And what I'm going to say is, I think I've said what I can say about the physical part, and you're really going to be sorry if I don't get to say the other stuff, because it's pretty interesting.
Okay, so I have more questions, but why don't we pause here and let you continue?
I get all of this, but okay. So now we come to the rechitza, as the body is washed. Okay. As the body is washed, what is recited? Verses from Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. So let's see the verses that are recited for a female. Hinach yafa rayati, nach yafa. How beautiful are you, my beloved friend. Your eyes are doves from behind your tresses. Your hair is a flock of goats that trail down from Mount Gilad, etc., etc., etc. Think about it. Think about the reality here. I'm on a Chevra Kadisha. I have in front of me the body of someone who has passed away. Very often they're advanced in age. Probably that body is not that attractive in its present state by conventional human standards. And what do these verses do? They say, however this body looks, in God's eyes, this is beautiful. Because remember, for the rabbis, Hinach Yafa Rayati, the beloved, is the people of Israel, and the speaker is God. And so the people involved in the Tahara, the Chevra Kadisha, is saying, we need to see this body through God's eyes. This is Selam Elokim. This is created in God's image. And it is beautiful and lovely. We have to see it as such and relate to it as such. And then we come to preparing for the Tahara, the washing that's actually the purification. And we quote the following Mishnah. Said Rabbi Akiva, you are fortunate, Israel. Before whom do you purify yourselves, and who purifies you? Your God in heaven, as it is said, and I will pour water upon you, and you will be purified. And it says the mikveh, the ritual bath of Israel, is God. Just as a mikveh purifies the defiled, so does the Holy One purify Israel. And I'll stop there. So what is the idea here? The idea here is that as the deceased is immersed in water, what is being washed away? What is being washed away are the moral impurities, the sins. A person is starting anew. The idea of immersion in a mikvah is whatever my state of being was before, it now falls away. And so this person before us lived the life that they lived, whatever it might be. We are immersing this person and saying, in God's eyes, you are beautiful, as in Shir HaShirim, and you are being purified by God. So your sins, your deficiencies, whatever they may be, are being left behind. And in that taking place, we're ready for this person to take on a new identity, which is the next thing that's going to happen. And let's see how that works. Okay. All right. So before we begin the clothing, we recite verses from Isaiah and Zechariah. Rejoicing will I rejoice in the eternal. My soul will be glad in my God. For God has clothed me in the garments of salvation. In a robe of righteousness will God cover me, as bride puts on priestly glory, and as a bride adorns herself. So once again, what we're saying is that when we are going to now be clothing the mate or the matad, the person who has passed away, these garments are not just pieces of fabric. They are, if you will, the person's aura. They represent the new identity that this person takes on in preparation for the journey to the world beyond. And okay. And after dressing, we say a verse from Numbers, Bigdei Kodesh Hem, Virachatz B'mayim et Bisaro Ulevesham. These are the garments of holiness, and you shall bathe your flesh in water and put them on. This is referring to the clothing that the high priest, Aaron HaKohen, wears on Yom HaKippurim. Now we have to back up here for a moment. What are the garments that are put on the mate? The names that are given to those garments are the names of the garments that were worn by the high priest. So a mate wears a mikba'at, a turban. A mate wears a zor, a belt, michnasayim, pants, a me'il, a jacket. In other words, each of the shrouds is given a name corresponding to a name of a garment worn by the high priest. So whether male or female, interestingly, the mate is garbed in garments that now transform this person from a nullity, not alive, to a spiritual Kohen Gadol. This person now becomes a high priest, is dressed in the garments of the high priest. So I have gone in my death from being the source of Tumah to being the holiest person in all of Torah, to being the high priest. And why I have to become the high priest, we'll talk about in a moment. Are there questions?
There are always questions. I was just organizing when I was getting everything that was coming in. I guess, you know what, I don't want to waste time because I just want to organize a little bit more because so much has come in. So why don't you go ahead and we'll stop against you.
Yeah, I just want to know, it's very interesting. I mean, this is just an interesting example of different interactions between when you teach something. The previous times that I've taught about Tahara, it's been to Chevra Kadishas. So they already have the experience. You know, they sort of already see this as a meaningful experience. And what I'm getting today, which is important, is that you do have to be ready to make certain kinds of psychological leaps to see this as a religiously meaningful and I guess maybe even positive experience. And so I hear that and I respect that.
I think, you know, it's fascinating. I've just been reflecting on this myself. This is such an opaque area for so many people, and it's amazing because, right, we all, if one dies eventually, we have, you know, we all lose our relatives eventually, and yet, like, we go to funeral after funeral without knowing what's happened before. So I think anyway, I think it's a salient point what you're saying. It's like there are the big ideas, but there's also, we're sort of assimilating the knowledge for the first time. I just want to share, Rabbi Diamond, if you don't mind. We actually have a couple of people who are joining us today from Kavod V'Nichum and the Gamliel Society, and they asked me, and I'm happy to share what they've sent in terms of resources for learning on a practical level about Chevra Kadisha. So thank you to our friends who have shared that. And maybe I will ask you one question, since now I had a chance to pull together a little bit. The question is honoring the dead and comforting the living. And is there an aspect of this that's the latter, or is it really all about honoring the dead and the broader concept that you're talking about in terms of the journey, or is part of it for the living as well?
Short answer is yes, it is for the living as well. Look, there's a machloket in the Gemara. If someone says, I don't want to be buried, do we honor that wish? And the dispute is set to center around the question of, is the burial just for the person who passed away, or also for the family? So how a person is treated in death definitely reflects on, is experienced by the people who love that person. So clearly, how we would treat someone who passes away has significance for the people who love that person. I mean, it's very simple. If you love me, then you love the people who love me and who I love, and you treat them with care and with respect. And if you don't, then that says something about your relationship with me, or your lack of care for me. Here's another way to think about it. At the heart of Torah is caring for the powerless. And whatever else the Chevra Kadisha is doing, they are taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. They are taking care of the mate. They are protecting it. They are interacting with it lovingly. And for me, what that says is that obligation that we have to be present for the powerless and to protect them extends beyond life itself. It extends even past death. And so my obligation to you, a theoretical you, when you are in a position of vulnerability, extends even when you are no longer alive, because in some way you are still you. And when I am washing you and clothing you and asking your forgiveness, I am perpetuating your you-ness. And I'm respecting it and I'm protecting it. That to me is what I experience when I think about this and when I teach it.
Do you want to take one more?
Sure.
There are a couple questions about dignity in terms of being unclothed and washed and all of that. Is there anything impairing the dignity of the deceased? And if not, what's right? How do we sort of shed those associations with nakedness?
So we cover the body whenever the body doesn't have to be uncovered. Not washing the body, and if we're not washing a particular part of the body, I mean, the body is covered, as much as possible. So in that sense, right, the dignity of the body is maintained. I would just say, though, that if somebody goes to the mikveh, they're naked. And one of the things about being naked, which I've alluded to already, is the ability to cast off the past, right? Like being naked is, I don't have any baggage. And I think that's part of what's powerful about the ritual here. In unclothing can be seen as a degrading act, but it can also be seen as a liberating act. Right? I mean, that was certainly part of the 60s idea, right? Sort of returning to this Edenic pre-lapsarian world before sin. And I think that there is a certain sense that in removing these clothing, again, the verses that are quoted are the verses from Joshua the high priest, who's taking off the clothing. Why? Not to be degraded, but to be liberated from the filth of that clothing and to put on new clothing. So that's what's happening in Tahara. Right? the old, the deficient, the stain is being removed. And so now, without any of that clothing, just as my body, I'm being purified, and I'm now in the position to become someone new. That's what I would say. Okay. Shall we move on?
Yes.
All right. Now, one of the things that is done when the deceased is put in the aron, okay, is some earth is put in, usually earth from Eretz Israel, if that's possible, okay? And we recite these somewhat mysterious words, V'chiper atmato amo, okay? Which the translation here says God will effect atonement for God's land, God's people, but was popularly understood in the sense of somehow the earth, the holy earth of Eretz Israel, atones for and somehow, again, purifies the tum'ah and the sinfulness of the person who passed away. So the earth serves as the presence of that earth serves as a kind of atonement. And notice that the coffin is called an aron. The term aron in biblical language refers to the holy ark, the aron ha'edut, right? The ark in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, the ark in the Beit HaMikdash. So again, it's evoking an icon of holiness. Okay, the person who is now in this aron, itself an icon of holiness, is a Kohen Gadol, is a high priest. All right, and where is that high priest going? Where does the high priest go on Yom Kippur? The high priest on Yom Kippur goes to the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Right, the one time during the year that this holiest place is entered is on Yom Kippur. So it seems to me that what's happened here is that someone who has passed away, who has therefore starts in a diminished state, I'm no longer alive. I no longer can perform mitzvot. My life at best has been checkered. I've sinned. I did not always do what I should have done. I did what I should not have done. That's where I am at the moment of my death. The Chevra Kadisha lovingly takes me in hand and says, your race is run. You no longer have the power to act, but we're going to act on your behalf. We're going to lovingly remove all of the past that can impede your journey to the Kodesh HaKodeshim, to the Holy of Holies. We're going to cleanse you of, literally of dirt, but also spiritually in a kind of immersion. And we're going to give you a power that we human beings, and here's the paradox, that we do not have, because you now have the capability to journey to a place that we cannot journey to, the Holy of Holies. You are about to journey to the presence of the Shekhinah, which is what the Holy of Holies is. It's the place where we stand most intimately in the presence of God. So we transform you from that diminished being to a being of power and holiness, a high priest. And we place you in this aron, and we are going to usher you onto your journey. And remember that a Kohen Gadol is a Melitz Yosher. Kohen Gadol is a representative, an advocate for the people. So we are saying to the deceased, you now become our advocate. You are our Kohen Gadol. you are our advocate before God in the Holy of Holies. And we send you as our representative to God, to the Holy of Holies. More questions, Julia?
We could fill the entire rest of the time with questions. So yes, there are definitely questions.
I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Let me finish one more thing, and then maybe we'll just do a bunch of questions.
Great.
Okay. So, yeah. So I'm skipping over some things, but so we've had the transformation, we've had the removing of clothing, we've had the washing, we've had the mikvah, we've had clothing in the priestly garments, placing the person in the aron, and now the aron is traveling, and we say, "Uvinsoa ha-mishkan yoridu oto alevim v'chanot ha-mishkan nekim oto alevim v'azar karev yumat." And in the traveling of the tabernacle, the Levites shall lower it. In the pitching of the tabernacle, the Levites shall raise it. And the stranger who approaches shall be put to death. And it shall be in the traveling of the Aron, Vayhi bin Soah Haaron, Vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai v'yafutzo oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. God says, arise, eternal one, and let your enemies be scattered. Let those who hate you flee before you. Right? So this represents the fact that when the people traveled in the desert, the Aron was their protector, right? As Moshe, right? As the Aron travels, Moshe calls out to God and asks for protection. So again, the Aron, the coffin, which is also an Aron Kodesh, a holy ark containing the Kohen Gadol, is venturing forth before us. Okay, which is not only protected because it is holy, but in a sense offers us protection. And then we start quoting from Psalm 91, 90, 91. We usually begin with the end of 90. Psalm 91 is a traveler's prayer, and we recite it in various situations when we're on a trip. We're about to embark on a trip. First of all, literally, it is the custom when we're leaving on a trip to recite Psalm 91, starting with the end of 90. Okay, and and there are some verses from that psalm here. Lo tu necha tu lecha ra'av v'nega lo yikrav ba'alecha ki malacha v'yitzavelach lishmorcha b'chol derachecha. No evil shall befall you, and disease will not approach your tent, for God's angels will be commanded to guard you in all your journeys. On their hands they will carry you, lest you strike your feet upon a stone, and so on. So it's a traveler's prayer. When do we recite the psalm? We recite it when we actually take a trip. That's the custom. It's also widespread practice to recite it Motzei Shabbat, when Shabbat is over. Why? Because again, we're leaving on a scary trip. We had Shabbat. We were in God's presence. We were protected by God's love and presence on Shabbat. And now we're heading on a journey into the week. And remember, it's nighttime now. Shabbat is over and it's nighttime. So it's night. The holiness has left us. It's a frightening moment. And so what do? We recite Psalm 91, the traveler's prayer. We say, God, we're going on the journey. We're beginning the next week. Please protect us. And when else do we recite the psalm? We recite it now as the Aron is being removed from the Tahara room. And when we get to the cemetery, we recite it as the coffin is being taken to the place of burial. Because this is an unsettling moment. It's a journey into the unknown, right? No one who is accompanying the coffin has been on that journey. We have not been on that journey. We don't know what that journey is. We don't know exactly what the destination looks like. And so we can't literally accompany the person who's passed away on the journey. Our time for that journey will come. But in this moment, we wish the traveler well. We wish the deceased well. And the way we do that is by reciting Yoshe B'Seter Elyon, by reciting the traveler's prayer and saying, may no evil befall you. Okay, what are some questions that we have?
Okay, so apropos what you were just saying, a few people asked about where is the soul during this time? Is it in the body? Are we conceiving of them as separate in any way, body and soul? And a related question, if so, is there kind of a moment at which they separate?
So that's a great question. It's a question that the rabbis ask also, not surprisingly. And also not surprisingly, there's not one answer to that question. But there is an idea that we find in other cultures too. I'm going to say it sort of the scholarly way, and then I want to say it the spiritual way, which is that there is a gradual parting. I don't remember the exact numbers now. Numbers are not my strong suit. But there's a passage in Talmud that says, I think that it's the first 3 days, the soul is totally present with the body after death, and then slowly but surely the soul, separates from the body. But initially, immediately after death, the soul is very much present in the body. So, I mean, if we want to sort of put that idea together with the Tahara process, we can say that at the time that Tahara is taking place, from a rabbinic perspective, the soul is very much present together with the body. So even though soul and body are not together in the same way that they are in life, it's also not entirely different. Okay, so somehow they're still in connection with each other, whatever that means, which I can say the words. I can't say exactly what it means because I don't know, but that somehow there's still a connection. And that eventually, as time goes on, I guess the soul sort of says, well, I'll see you. You're going to be down here in this grave, but I need to travel upwards. I need to be with God. And so and spiritually, I would just say, I don't know how many people have been present who've been in the same room with someone who passed away. Not that long ago, I was present with my mother when she passed away. And it's a very strange thing because I looked at her and it wasn't my mother because she wasn't moving, she wasn't talking. But I felt that she was there in whatever way that was true. And of course, we can psychologize it and say, well, of course you're going to feel that because you don't want to lose somebody. So you're not going to look at the body and say, well, that's it. Brain shut down, all the functions have ceased, and that's it. You're just looking at lifeless flesh. So you don't want to do that. So you say there's a soul there. I get that. But I choose to see this as something very real. I choose to see that when I saw my mother and when I felt her presence, it was because she was present, whatever that means. I don't claim to be able to explain what that means in coherent terms. But in any case, I think that the whole notion of Tahara and this whole notion of close attention to the body is based on, if you want, you can say it's based on a refusal to face reality. You could say it that way. You say, sorry, we don't accept that the person is just dead and there's no personality here. There's just flesh. But certainly the belief and the assumption is, and my experience of it was obviously highly culturally and psychologically conditioned, but nonetheless, was that my mother's here. My mother's here, not in the way that she was. And I understand that separation is starting. And eventually she's not here in the way that she's here right now, but in some way she's here. That was my experience of it. And I think Tahara is founded in the willingness to believe that the spirit is still there.
Thanks for sharing that. There have been a lot of questions about tumah, about impurity, and I'll sort of share a few. One person asked, are there different mikvaot for the dead versus a simcha, a bride going to mikvah kind of thing? Is there, I guess more broadly, the question is, does this body contaminate anything else around it? Does it contaminate the Chevra Kadisha? I think, that's the question. If we're kind of washing away tumah, there also something that we need to be concerned about with the presence of tumah there.
So, okay, when we say we're immersing the body, we're not taking the body out to a mikveh somewhere. Okay, the body is ritually, it is not immersed in the same way as a body is taken into the mikveh. It involves pouring certain amounts of water in a ritually prescribed way. So it is a different kind of mikveh. With regard to the tumah question, halachically, and this is what I said way back when, a corpse is the ultimate source of ritual impurity, and anyone who comes into contact with that body becomes ritually impure. The ritual of Tahara develops at a time when ritual impurity is really not a relevant issue for most Jews, except for Kohanim, who, according to most halachic authorities, continue to be forbidden to come into contact with ritual impurity, forbidden to come into contact with the dead. But for all other Jews, there's no reason that I'm prohibited from coming into contact with ritual impurity. If I'm a member of a Chevra Kadisha and I come into contact with the body, do I become ritually impure? Do I become tamei? Yes, I do. But the general halachic assumption is that we all are ritually impure and that we're tamei made, because at some point, in some shape or form, we've come into contact with the dead. We'd really have to have someone who is in a Chevra Kadisha talk to us at this moment and say, what is your experience as you're dealing with the mate? Do you feel, ritually defiled? I can only say that speaking to many, many people on Chevra Kadisha, leaving aside, the halachic technicalities, they are lifted up, that it's a holy experience. It's a spiritual experience, because you're in the presence of the unseen, the seen, but also the unseen. I think that this whole ritual is a wonderful reminder not to limit ourselves to what we see. It'd be so easy to look at a corpse and to see it as something to be discarded, useless. And I think what's so powerful about Tahara is refusal to do that, is to say, even in this moment, I think of the person who inhabited this body and maybe in some sense still does. That's what I want to think about. That's what I want to respect. That's what I find so powerful about the Tahara ritual.
I've had a lot of comments from people who are members of Chevra Kadishas. So there was one that I think really speaks to what you were saying. So since you raised it, this person wrote, "We are taught that as a Chaver Kadisha, we are spiritually vulnerable after doing a Tahara. That's the tuma that's being transferred, as it were, and that there's sort of a special heightened need for self-care afterwards." Okay, a lot of people have asked about COVID and just kind of the difficulty with making peace with all of the ways in which Tahara was compromised from its traditional version. One person shared about the deceased being wrapped and sealed in plastic, and the sense of failure that accompanied that, which sounds tremendously painful. Fears about infectious disease in the process. Do we need to be concerned, or what does the tradition think happens to this person and their soul if we're not able to do Tahara? Those are some of the questions around COVID that were asked.
Right, these are hard questions. I'm going to say something that probably will sound arrogant, but it's been helpful for me at many points, and I think it will be helpful to some people here, which is sometimes I say to myself, well, let me see if I can think of a less arrogant way of saying this. I ultimately believe that God is love, that God loves us. The Mishnah says, "Chayav adam lomar b'shvili nivra ha'olam." Every person is obligated to say, the world was created for my sake, and as I've explained on other occasions, based on something I read in Orach Me'Sharim, it doesn't mean the world was created for me and not for you and not for you, not for you, but it means that each of us is of infinite value. And we don't need to present a CV to be loved. We're loved because we are God's children. God showed us that God loves us by creating us, by allowing us to come into the world. So we're all loved unconditionally by God. And ideally by other people in the world too. It's harder for people to do it, but God does it. So starting at that point, for me to say that to entertain the idea that if someone wasn't buried in accordance with the customs, then somehow they will, I don't know, lose out, I don't know what the right phrase is, becomes for me spiritually and theologically impossible. God loves us. God knows that we do the best to carry out our obligations, and in this case, to treat a dead person the way that person is treated. If it's not possible, it just doesn't exist in my vocabulary, my mindset to say that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to say, sorry, plastic's no good. I'm not admitting you into the world to come. Whatever we might imagine it would be. And for me, there's a complex interplay between ritual and the intention of ritual. And so I think that what we can say is, here's the ritual that we have received. And if we accept being part of this tradition and this ritual tradition, then we will do it. And if we can't do it because of disease, let's say, we will do what we can do. And here's one of the most powerful aspects of halakha that I think is often overlooked. On the one hand, halakha obligates me to do things. On the other hand, halakha says, and once you have done them to the best of your ability, it is done. So if someone passes away and there's a problem with COVID, and the best that I can do is to provide a plastic sheet around that person, since halakha says in those situations, that is what is to be done, I have fulfilled my obligation. exactly in the same way as someone who rinsed the body, washed the body, immersed the body, said all of the tefillot. I have fulfilled my obligation, and halakha is there to liberate me from guilt of what I could have done or wanted to do and could not have done. Easier said than done, but I want us to hear that. I want us to hear that halakha says there's a b'diavad. There are situations where we can't do the ideal, but we have fulfilled our obligation. And God hears that, and our fellow human beings hear that. And I would say the flip side to that is that if I can't do the Tahara exactly as it's prescribed, what can I do in the spirit of the Tahara to respect this person? Is there a tefillah that I can say? Is there someone, I don't know. I'd leave it to people to fill in the blanks. But that's sort of the give and take here. On the one hand, halakha is a tiered system, and it acknowledges that sometimes we do what we can do, and it falls far short of the textbook ideal. And it's still done. We have done it. We are just like the textbook person, we have fulfilled our obligations. And on the other hand, we are also always striving. I mean, a little bit of a tangent, but it's one of my favorite illustrations of this. So, kibud av v'em, honoring our parents. Rambam says, Maimonides says, that if a parent is ill, and particularly mentally ill, and the child cannot deal with that parent oneself, one can hire other people to take care of the parent. Ravad, his older contemporary, says that's ridiculous. If you're not taking care, you can't find it, you're having trouble taking care of your parent. Are strangers going to do a better job? Of course, the answer is if they're trained professionally, probably yes, but okay. I learned in my own life that the Rambam and the Ravad are both right. My father's mother had schizophrenia, and she was in a hospital most of her life. We used to go to visit. My father tried having her live with us, and it was a nightmare. Just couldn't be done. So she went back to the hospital. We used to visit her, I think, every other Sunday. And when I saw that, I understood the Rambam. I mean, I didn't understand at the time, I was a little kid, but later on when I learned these, I understood the ways in which the Rambam and the Ramban and the Ravad are both right. On the one hand, sometimes we cannot do the textbook thing. We cannot honor our parents by having them with us physically. We cannot perform the Tahara in its ideal form. And so in the case of the parent, sometimes you have to hire professionals. The parent has to go to a hospital. But here's the thing. It still remains my responsibility. The people who are taking care of my parent are only my shlichim. They're my agents, but I remain the responsible party. That I don't give up. The obligation I do not lose. And my father understood that. And that's why he showed up every other Sunday. And my grandmother was in the middle of New Jersey, and we were out on Long Island. It wasn't such a short trip. It took effort and planning to do that. And my father was saying, I know I can't do it all myself, but I haven't abandoned my mother. And by the way, because he didn't abandon her mother, you can be sure that she got better treatment at that hospital than she would have gotten if he didn't show up every other Sunday, because people know that you're watching. Makes a difference. You know what? I'm going to stop sharing. So I would apply that here and always. We do what we can do. Torah asks us of things, but then the Torah also says to us, stop. You did it. You did what you could do. Don't make yourself crazy, because if you do that, you undermine the goodness of what you did. And at the same time, when we come to a point where we can't quite do things as we would want to do them, as Torah would ask us to do them, we can always say, but maybe there is a way that in some shape or form, I can do what the Torah is asking of me. Those are the two poles that I have to have before me in the performance of mitzvot and probably in life in general. So that's my long answer to a short question.
I think that's such a helpful approach, and it's just making me realize, those of us who get to study halachic texts all the time, this is just part of the bread and butter. It's like everywhere you look, there's, here's what you want to do ideally, and when you can't, here, then here's the halacha. With kashrut, with Shabbat, with so many things. So there's such a just total acceptance in the halachic tradition of the fact that on many occasions in many realms we can't do things in the ideal way. So I think that's really helpful and hopefully comforting to some people joining us. And I do want to share, just on that note, of some people who are active in Chaver Kadisha work shared in the chat with me that virtual Tahara rituals were developed that were very powerfully spiritual in their own way, and that actually allowed for more people to take part in the ritual. So, right, kind of like this Zoom learning like that we're all able to do together. Okay, great, thank you. So just changing gears a little bit. A lot of people asked about sort of different traditions. So I guess the question is, and we had our spring series was about the other. Is Tahara possibly, the kind of the one universal Jewish practice? Are there variations between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, between different movements? And that's the main question. But then, kind of related to that, someone was asking, are there parallels in other religions? Is there something like kind of really universal about these concepts that you've shared with us? Something maybe instinctively human in developing a ritual like this.
The first part, I am not an expert, and maybe there are people on the who are in Chaver Kadishas who know more about. I mean, they're obviously. I mean, look, we're talking about Jews, so obviously, different communities have things that are different in some shape or form. But to the best of my knowledge, in its basic components, this is now practiced by all Jewish communities, but I may be wrong. With regard to the second part of your question, I mean, if we put on our sociologist or anthropologist hat for a moment, the moment between death and burial is, and I think I used this word earlier, favorite word of anthropologists, a liminal moment. That is, if we sort of want to think about this, here's the thing. I learn a lot from anthropology, but okay. Death is frightening. Bodies can be frightening. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter very famously, I think this happened, but it's one of those stories where if it didn't happen, you're not surprised that they told the story about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was the father of the Musar movement. Apparently, when he was dying, he was alone with some Jewish guy, and he spent his final moments saying to the fellow, "Don't worry about being alone with the body. It's not that terrible. Nothing terrible is going to happen. I'll die, and you'll be alone with the body, and then you'll do what you have to do." The point of the story being many things, but one of it being, it's unsettling. It's unsettling the average person to be alone with the dead. And we don't know what to make of a dead person. Who or what is that body? I mean, which is part of what we've been talking about. And what Tahara does is it assigns an identity to that body. Okay, it configures who or what that person is. But most fundamentally, at the end of the day, we don't know, and we're unsettled. And so, from the anthropological point of view, to deal with that unsettled feeling and perhaps that fright, we have to have a ceremony that defines what has happened and defines who the dead person is, and uses, and we move from being powerless in the face of death to being powerful in that we get to create a ritual that determines what's going to happen with the dead person. So we should not be surprised by the fact that probably every religion and culture has some such ceremony, because death is frightening and unsettling. So we are definitely not alone. And we all know whether it's wakes, Islam has its own ceremonies, every religion and every culture has its own ceremonies. But here's the key thing. We can think about the Tahara ritual from a sociological, anthropological point of view and say, well, of course, Jews, like everyone else, are unsettled by the presence of a dead body. Jews don't know what to make of it. So we create this whole ritual to create boundaries and definitions to deal with our fear and in our uncertainty. That's one way of looking at what's going on here. And the average anthropologist would say, yeah, that is what's going on here. I want to vote for and I want to advocate for the spiritual way of seeing things, which is that as spiritual people, we refuse to see death as the end. We refuse to see life as purely biological. And even though someone has died, biologically, that person is not there. We believe that the sum total of a person is more than biology. And Tahara represents that belief. We still feel that there is a you there, whether you want to describe the you as the sum total of everything that this person has been, whether you want to describe it as an actual spiritual presence, you are still here. You who have passed away, you are still here. And we are not abandoning you. We are taking care of you. And we will accompany you on the journey as far as we can take you. At a certain point, we have to say goodbye. But until that point, we're here because we love you, because we care about you. That's what Tahara is to me.
Thank you. I want to just before we end, I want to just again share because there's so much practical interest here. I want to share the website of Kavod V'Nichum, which is jewish-funerals.org. I just put it in the chat. And then also a number of people were recommending to me in the chat a book called Chesed Shel Emet by Rabbi Stuart Kelman, and lo and behold, he is here on the Zoom with us. So I'm going to, beautiful. I'm going to share the link to that as well. And I'm going to, in the 30 seconds, I want to give you the final word, but I just want to let people know that we have a change for next week. We are going to have Professor Barbara Mann teaching us. She's unfortunately had a death in the family, and Professor Emeritus Dr. Raymond Schindlin, who was scheduled to teach later on in the series, he'll be teaching us next week about Yehuda Halevi, kind of the archetypal poet and pilgrim in our tradition. So we're at 3:30. Do you want to just, did you share your final sentence, or you want to give us anything more to?
I think I can do better than the last sentence that I offered. I'm going to quit while I'm ahead.
I think that's perfect. And you are ahead. I had many comments about how just inspiring and beautiful and soulful and helpful this has been. So thank you so much. We're always so grateful when you teach in this series, and thank you. Thanks to everyone for joining us, and the recording of the session will be up within a couple of days on the series page, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.